Hey, how's it going? Hope you're doing good. I had a lot of people ask me about how I do drums and to say that it would be interesting to have a video on that. I've had other people say to make a track from scratch or to make guitar and stuff like that. So I thought, whilst I might not do an entire track from start to finish unless people really end up liking what I end up making here because I have no idea what I'm about to do, I thought I would at least do drums and guitar and talk about just how I approach these two elements in a Project Air song. It obviously differs genre to genre, but I figured that's what people would be most interested in. Before we get into this though, I do want to say I'm not a drummer. I'm not even someone that I would consider as being very good at making drum arrangements. My drums are usually pretty bare bones, or they're kind of like a sort of Frankenstein selection of samples and loops and maybe other things. But I thought I'd share some of the ways that I approach drums most commonly and some of the techniques that I might employ if I want to make a drum part more interesting, because I figure there's maybe at least one or two things that are kind of interesting in here. Once we've got that, we'll lay like some chords over it, and then potentially in a part two, we'll do how I arrange guitars for and we'll use this same song. So let's jump into Studio One then, I guess. So first things first, this is my blank template. This is a template I have that I use for Project Air songs. I use it for pretty much every Project Air song. And obviously it gets developed from here, but what I've done ages ago is I started up a template project that has everything that I do in pretty much every project. So every channel that needs it has an EQ on it. I have a guitar rig preloaded. It's a bit outdated because it's still using Guitar Rig 5, so I need to probably update it at some point. Then there's things like compressors that I know I use on specific channels, the same reverb that I use all the time as my reverb bus, which just needs a bit of tweaking usually to the song. And then I have my sidechains and everything set up, which this is the sidechain that I'm using for all of my songs. And that's something that I have in place that just saves me a little bit of time. And I cannot stress enough how much I advise having a template. If you know in every project that there are things that you do, if you know every time you load up that one plugin, make a template of it. It just I know it's saving you a few seconds here and there, but just having something that's ready to go and ready for you to write in, it takes out a lot of the prep work, and it just means that I can jump in and play piano, or I can jump in and just play guitar. So for a Project Air song, drums are usually the first thing that I do anyways. They are something that I prefer to write to. I'm not someone that likes writing or recording to a metronome because it just isn't inspiring. Kind of like I said with the whole drones thing before, having some sort of musical context that I can write to, it just makes the kind of experience of writing feel more creative to me, at least. As much as you can obviously write with a metronome, and sometimes I have done that. I have written parts that I've found out the tempo that they need to be recorded at and then recorded them to a metronome, but that's very rare, and it's usually if I come to the studio with a specific musical idea, which is not super often. It's more that I kind of want to see what comes out in the moment with everything at my disposal. And so drums can kind of start really from wherever, I think when you're laying out drums. Now, some people will obviously write to a drum loop and then replace it, and you can totally do that. But I like to just kind of lay something out that feels a bit more unique straight away. So for this, we're going to mostly be using some drums from a sample pack I've been working on. It's not out. I don't know when it'll be out or if it'll even be out. But I thought it'd be fun to use these drums because even if we're trying to make something more chilled or more sleepy, these drums, if we listen to some of the snares, aren't those sort of snares anyway. And that's kind of something I wanted to talk about because this is something that I do a lot, and I like to do a lot of shaping with my drums and start with something that is maybe a bit more versatile and then kind of tone it into what I want it to be. I think most of the time when I'm looking for samples, it's I'm trying to look for something that's 60 to 70% of the way towards the drum sound I'm sort of searching for in my head. So let's lay in just a snare real quick. Let's use that. Let's try that for now. So let's just put that on the 2 and the 4. I'll make a little 4-bar loop. So here we go. So now we have a snare in there. That's really loud. In fact, let's just turn all the channels down to that level. Cool, right. So obviously right now it's really, really sharp. So let's just EQ it. Okay, I'm not super feeling it. Let's start again. There we go. That's quite a nice little one. That's got a nice sound to it. So let's add an EQ again. Just dampen it a little bit. There we go. That's much, much nicer. Another thing that I quite like to do with shaping drums is to transpose stuff. So if that's like already, if it's sounding a bit too sharp even still, I might go in and just transpose it like 2 semitones. There we go, and it just sounds a little bit darker already. So now we have that in there. Let's just add in then some hats. There we go, that sort of works. So something I'll start with most of the time is usually just like a really simple like 8th hi-hat pattern, right? Like this. Let's just EQ it and darken some of those hi-hats up a little bit. There we go. And right now, like it, you know, we're not using MIDI, so we're not humanizing, we're not changing velocities to create, you know, variations in volume and stuff. And we can do that. But the thing that I quite like about working with audio samples like this, especially in Studio One, and I imagine it's very similar in other DAWs, is that I can do things like this, where right now the hi-hats have a load of attack on them. I can add a fade. So they sound a bit more like a shaker almost. I could even duplicate them, add them in between, make them quite quiet, and then add a fade. So now we get something like that. And then we could start going with some of these other ones, maybe other than the ones on the sort of downbeats there, and do something like this. Already sounding quite a bit more interesting, so we can use that for now. Next up, we're going to pick a kick. These are the kicks that I have right now in my sample pack. There we go. That's got a nice little bit of like low end to it. Cool. Something I also quite like doing with my kicks is sidechaining my hats to my kick, but really with a really fast release. So we can change the time base over here to like an 1/8. And make it so as soon as they get ducked, they're already coming right back up. Because it just helps where you have like transients stacking up. So obviously the hi-hats have got like the initial attack on them, and then you've got the kick which has its attack. And without the sidechain, it just all becomes a bit like it creates more volume that I just don't necessarily need, especially when you're working on chill tracks. But whereas with it, it just makes that initial transient feel so much nicer on the ears. And then, because it's doing it automatically, you know, I'm not having to automate it wherever I put a kick or something. So let's just create like a kick pattern real quick. Let's do something like real basic, kind of like this. There we go. Super straightforward, right? Darken up the kick a little bit more. The snare can probably use a bit of reverb, so this is, again, where I have this template, I have a reverb send, I can just immediately go and add to my snare. Sometimes I'll add a second EQ to drums just to kind of see what the curve's looking like after the sort of changes I've made, because there you can see I'm doing quite a lot of gentle shaping to the sound. And this allows me to sort of see cleanly without, you know, being swayed by what I've already done, to see what it's looking like now. So we can just darken it a little bit more around there. Give it a tiny bit more reverb. There we go. So now it's sort of changing the context of our hi-hats a little bit as well. So I don't love the fact that this one doesn't have a fade. In fact, we could just give them all a fade. Kind of negates what we did with the sidechain, but that's, you know, drums for me are just like this sort of like experimentation, you know, like this way of just finding like something until it sort of is mostly where I want it to be. Like I say, I'm not a drummer. I'm not particularly good at this. I don't really put a lot of thought into it. Something that I also quite like to do with hi-hats is give them a bit of like movement. So I use this plugin by Waves, MondoMod, which creates like a bit of, I don't know if this is actually going to be possible to see. There we go. It's like an auto panning thing, so you can change the range in the stereo field as to where it pans, so you'll hear the hi-hat start to like move around. And you can just really slow it down, and I make it just so like they're not going crazy all over the place. Sometimes they do, but most of the time it's just about giving the hi-hats like a little bit of movement so that they feel a bit more dynamic in the mix. Then we'll add like a ride or something on there. Have I got any rides? I haven't got any rides. Let's go grab one of my favorite rides real quick. This ride, I've used it on, I swear, like most Project Air songs. And again, we've got a bit of like a transient there, so add a bit of a fade to it, and we're all good. And again, I can transpose it, like if I want to make it a tiny bit darker, try transposing it around. There's a lot of fun things you can do with cymbals to make them sound more interesting. Obviously, a lot of cymbals are quite sharp and harsh, which is difficult to use in like chill settings. So we can EQ them, we can just lose some of those highs a little bit, maybe wash it out with like a Valhalla Shimmer verb or something, just to give it a bit more like spaciness. There we go. Something else I quite like to do when I'm creating a drum loop is to add some sort of like field recording in there that just adds that like randomness to it. And you could have it be as long as the whole song, so that it's never looping and repeating itself. You could have it just be a 4-bar loop. You could have it be 8 bars, 16 bars, whatever you want to do, right? So let's pick some of those out. These are just some sounds I have from Freesound, which you can go, and if sounds are Creative Commons, then you're good to use them in your songs. Copyright. This is quite a good sample. This is a sample I've used a few times. This is just something I found on Freesound, where it's like a windy marina. So it's got like the sort of strings hitting like flagpoles that creates like a bit of percussive sort of sound. You know, we can telephone that quite a bit, and it's going to be more of like a sort of element that's in there rather than something we're really hearing. So go back to the start there. There we go. So that just gives it a bit of texture. We can probably open it up a little bit more. Send it to my drum bus. And what else? I do find as well that a really, really big thing is adding things that you've recorded yourself. I do try and use as many of my own field recordings as possible. Freesound is just a bit of a good sort of, if I can't get to a marina because I don't live anywhere near the sea, then something like that can help. A sample that I do use quite often is actually something I recorded where I was quite drunk and we'd been making cocktails, and so I mic'd up the drink that was like fizzing, and I just recorded the sound of the drink fizzing, and we got this. And this is just amazing for like a texture, especially in that second half where it's a bit different. So we can do that. We can stretch it to be the whole length, because, you know, I think when you're working with samples, as long as you're not like ruining the quality of it, like you can sort of like warp it and mess around with it and have loads of fun with it, because it makes it sound more unique and interesting in that moment. It's not like you're using it in the same way and refusing to time stretch it or warp it or anything or transpose it in each project. And that gives samples so much more life, I think, when you've recorded them yourself especially. So you can hear there's like a bit of like artifacting in there, but I don't hate that. So let's actually just leave like the high end like in there and put it really low in the mix. Probably give the snare a bit more reverb now. Add some reverb to the hi-hats, just a little bit. Slow it down a little bit as well. Let's go to like 68 BPM. Cool. That's really like drums are kind of this straightforward and simple to me. Sometimes there are other things that I'll do, but first let's look at what I think is like my secret sauce. And it really is just parallel compression. So on my drum bus, and this is in my template project, so this has been used on every single Project Air song. It's called Supercharger GT, and I think it was given away free a while ago, but I just got it with like complete ages ago, and I've used it on every drum bus ever since. And it has this great sounding drum bus preset. I can't talk today. That all you have to do is switch it on. And this input trim here, it does auto gain matching. I can't remember what the correct phrase is. It might be gain matching, where it's basically the input trimming where you would match the input and output to kind of gain match, level match with the compressor before and after. So what you're hearing is the compressor doing its work. You can just get this into the green. So right now we need to turn it up. And that's too far, so we leave it about there. About 5.1 dB, and we can dial up the compression, we can go crazy with it, and I always dial it in around 50%. So what we're doing here is parallel compression, which I find just glues your drums together and it makes it stop sounding like a bunch of different samples that you've laid out, and it makes it sound like a full, actual, real drum track. And that's without it. And with it, just find that it makes everything sound just a little bit nicer. It's, for me, again, it's like that, like writing something so that it feels like a finished product whilst you're working on it almost. Okay, so now I guess let's just lay down like a really like simple, straightforward like chord progression or something. That works, that works. Kind of messed up that last little bit there, but now we have a little 4-bar loop of chords. And this is where, again, once you start doing this, this is where I might tweak the drums again to try and get them to kind of match what I'm playing on the keys or the guitar or something. Whereas I think actually right now it kind of works quite well, but this is where you might want to tweak like the kick pattern or something to try and match the chords to make it feel more like composed. Let's just add like a synth bass in there for now. This is pretty much like a bass preset I've been using as like a placeholder. I'm actually lending out my bass at the moment. So this is something I use for writing when I don't have a bass or I can't be bothered to pick up a bass. So let's just play something in, I guess. Messed up some of the timings, but we can just go in and correct those real quick. Quantize the bass because it's working with the kick. I feel like that you could go up to there as well. Right now that was correct. And there we go, and that's pretty much like a song started from drums and building up on it from there. Like, there's probably not tons more I would do to this. This is where you could maybe start adding differences in the drums in like a second half or something as we build out a structure. But I thought as well I would quickly just go through and show some of the other things that I might do when I'm writing drums to kind of create a bit more interest in them and just a bit more variation. So one of the things that I've been doing lately, especially as I've been working on jazzier stuff, is layering samples with actual drum kits from different plugins, whether it be through Contact, through EZDrummer as we're using here, or battery and things like that. I don't really use a lot of like drum machines. I probably should, but I don't really like the idea of like building kits and then playing them most of the time. It's very rare that I actually just play drums in. It's kind of, unless I know what I want specifically, which is more often if I'm writing like pop or rock or something, that's where I might play something and then quantize it. But most of the time, especially for lo-fi, like the drums don't need to be massively developed, you know? So here we could probably, instead of using our hi-hats, I mean, it sounds great without the hi-hats, just with those samples in there. But so one of the kits I've been using is this like brush kit from the singer-songwriter expansion for EZDrummer 2. I've been looking for like some good brush drums for a while. And this finally had those, but it also had these like really nice, small sounding, like dry drum kits, you know. Just sounds really like nice, like it's in a really small room or something. I don't like the pads on this keyboard at all. They're not sensitive enough for me, but this is where you'd maybe want to overlay the snare as well and use like a brush, so we could there we go. And so we can quantize that. We could leave it completely unquantized. We could just quantize the snares. And then at that point, we've got something that's played in, that's a bit more human, that's layered with everything else we've been doing. Could maybe soften up those rides a little bit. Could even layer it with the snare that we have used. I find most of the time, like the most important thing is giving yourself options. Like I'd almost say overdevelop your drums and then pull back from it. Because as you saw, right, when we took away the hi-hats, it was like, actually, it works without the hi-hats and just with the old snare. And there's no reason why you couldn't have like a section that kind of slowly builds up and you introduce these other elements of drums a bit later on. So we start off like this, and then you introduce and you start building up the song that way. I'm quite enjoying this, so I guess we'll do guitars in a part 2, but hopefully that helps. Like there's loads of different ways that you can approach drums. I have a really simple way of doing it that I actually don't even think is that good. It's more just writing around them, and it's making something that at least feels like it's been composed for writing. And that's why I think making something that you can just jam to and feel out a song, rather than, you know, writing a piano part against a metronome and then bringing that into the studio and then making drums work around that. It's like, it obviously depends on the way that you prefer to write, but drums for me, they're a writing tool. They're a tool for me to get the song that I want. And that's why I think writing to them probably makes the drums sound like they were composed for that song, because I mean, literally they started the song. It was never written for it. It was kind of done the other way around. I'm sure there's many other people that do it this way. I don't think the way I do this is particularly special or anything, but yeah, I hope that this helped. I hope it was like eye-opening or something. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, if there's anything that I can go into a bit more depth on, then yeah, like let me know. This was obviously not on like how I mix drums or anything. It was mainly just shaping and EQ and stuff. But I think the main kind of lessons I would say that I'd want people to get from this is that you can use pretty much any drum samples. You just want to think about how you shape them and how you can change them, whether you make them shorter or longer by adding reverb, or just literally cutting the file and then like adding a fade out to it to make something really, really short and snappy. You can use all these different samples in different ways, but also like don't overthink it. Don't think like you have to create these incredibly complex drum arrangements. That's where you can use things like samples and field recordings. Most of the field recordings I've just done on my phone where I've just left it around or something. And you can use anything as like a percussive layer, whether it be just like the wind blowing leaves in trees, whether it be a drink fizzing, or if it's just you rummaging with some paper or something. You can create percussion in any way that you want. So, and those can be used to create layers. And if you record really long samples, you don't even have to worry about it feeling like it's looping or anything like that. And definitely parallel compress your drums. It does just make things glue together so much more, and it makes the sort of collection of samples that you're using feel like they're part of a kit. Because you don't necessarily, I think, need to build like kits each time, you know, and I know that there's people that do that, and I think there's something to be said for making a kit that sounds great and sounds almost like signature to you. But for me, it's like my drums are different every time because the samples that I pick are different depending on what I'm feeling. And to me, that's part of like the sort of creative expression part of it, where it is like, if I know that I want a darker, sleepier snare, or like something that's like more hip hoppy, or something that sounds more like a real kit, you know, like it changes based on what I'm feeling that day when I'm sitting down to write, or what I want to write. Because sometimes, you know, I'll sit down and say, I want to write a sleepy record, I want to write a hip hop record or something like that. So experiment with it and have fun with it, and don't feel like you have to be tied to like a set of samples. You can use anything. Just think about the way that you're EQing and changing volumes and creating something more dynamic. Yeah, I hope this helped. Like I'm really not very good at drums. I don't think anyways, but I hope this helped in terms of how I go about processing them and arranging them. And yeah, so thanks for watching. We'll do a part 2, which will be up in the next couple of days, where we'll do guitars with this song, and I'll show you some of the ways that I approach guitar for my songs. And it's keeping it real simple. So spoilers. Yeah, hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, any comments, leave them below. I'll get to them. Might make other videos if they're particularly inspiring. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. So bye.